Gaza City, winter 2023. The cold pushed through every broken window of the school we had turned into a half-hospital. The generator stuttered, keeping the lights alive in fits. I had been in Gaza only 3 weeks. Back home I was a surgical resident in Boston, trained in rooms that smelled of polished steel and bright antiseptic. I had come here with an NGO, believing I could lend my skills for a short time before returning to finish my fellowship. Nothing in my training had prepared me for corridors filled with dust, for shelves stripped bare, for children sleeping on classroom floors. I kept telling myself the same thing my mentors had once told me. Stay calm, do the work in front of you. You cannot fix a war. The doors banged open just after midnight. A stretcher came in, carried by 2 men with their jackets ripped from the cold wind. On it lay a young man, maybe 20, face pale under fever, lips cracked. His abdomen was wrapped in damp gauze. Every breath rattled. Amal, the nurse who could organize chaos itself, leaned close and whispered. He was caught in the blast before evening prayers. Roads blocked for hours. He is already septic. We worked quickly. His blood pressure was 80/50, pulse racing at 140. Respiration shallow, 30 a minute. Oxygen saturation 89 when the monitor caught a signal. His abdomen was rigid, tender to touch. Guarding, rebound pain, classic peritonitis. His temperature kept climbing past 102. I thought of all the tests I would order back in Boston. CT scan, full lab panel, broad-spectrum antibiotics by the clock. Here there was none of that. Amal held up 2 empty IV bags from the supply cart. 1 half bag of saline remained. The pharmacy shelf offered little better. 1 vial of cefotaxime, not enough for a full course, but enough for a single dose before the knife. I drew it up myself. Better something than nothing. Yusuf, the senior surgeon from Khan Yunis, stood beside me. His hands had done this for 40 years, through 2 wars, through nights darker than this one. He asked quietly what I thought. I told him the truth. Perforated viscus from shrapnel, peritonitis already spreading. Without surgery, he would die before dawn. With surgery, the risks were high, but at least there was a chance. We discussed anesthesia. No ventilator, no reliable power. The ketamine stock was low, but still there. Enough to keep his airway reflexes while we worked. Amal prepared the syringes, her face set. We had oxygen cylinders, but the regulator leaked. We agreed to bag him by hand if needed. We moved him into a classroom converted to an operating space. The chalkboard still held half-erased arithmetic. Amal draped the table with the cleanest sheets left. The cold draft from the broken panes made the IV fluid colder than it should be. The boy whispered that he was freezing. I told him we would give him blankets. We tucked them tight around his shoulders. He tried to breathe with me, in for 1, out for 2. The monitor traced his effort in shaky lines. We sterilized what we had, a scalpel blade heated over a lighter, dipped in alcohol, gauze replaced with boiled and dried strips of cloth. The ritual felt fragile but necessary. Yusuf looked at me and asked if I was ready. I thought of my residency oath written on scrap paper years ago. Do the next right thing, even when afraid. We explained to the boy in words simple enough to cross pain. We would operate, we would try. He studied my face, eyes glassy from fever. His fingers twitched, then settled as if letting go of a rope. We wheeled him down the corridor. The wind moved through the plastic sheets taped over the windows. Children slept in another classroom, their drawings taped to the wall. One girl opened her eyes as we passed and lowered them again. Her silence followed us. In the operating room, we paused. The generator hummed. The headlamps were tightened. Amal checked the airway. Yusuf prepared the instruments. I placed my hands where they needed to be. Outside, the city was still burning. Inside, the circle of light steadied on the boy's abdomen. I exhaled once and nodded. The headlamp lit a narrow circle on his abdomen, everything else swallowed by shadow. Amal pushed the ketamine slowly through the IV. The boy's eyelids fluttered. His breathing steadied but remained shallow. We kept a mask over his face, a thin trickle of oxygen hissing from the cracked cylinder. Yusuf checked the airway with a laryngoscope at the ready but held off. If he lost his reflexes, we would have to intubate and bag him through the night. I whispered a small prayer he would keep breathing on his own. The scalpel blade had been dulled by too many nights. We had heated it, soaked it, and still it dragged on the first cut. Yusuf steadied my hand. The incision opened across the left side of the abdomen. Warm blood welled instantly. Amal leaned in with strips of boiled cloth, pressing hard. Without cautery, we relied on clamps, ties, and pressure. Each pulse spilled another reminder of what we lacked. The generator sputtered. One headlamp flickered out. For a moment the room was held together only by Amal's flashlight clenched between her teeth. I forced myself not to look at the walls, not at the faces watching, only at the wound. The peritoneal cavity was full of cloudy fluid and streaks of blood. The smell of infection rose sharp. This was not just trauma. Sepsis had already claimed the ground. I traced the path of the shrapnel. A jagged tear in the small bowel leaked slow drops of enteric fluid. We had no stapler, no fancy sutures, only silk and a needle holder worn thin. Yusuf placed 2 sutures with hands that never shook. I followed, reinforcing where I could. The bowel looked fragile, edematous, angry. Amal blotted the field again and again with the cloth strips, her hands already stained. Minutes stretched like hours. The boy shivered despite the anesthesia, his fever breaking through in waves. Amal called out his blood pressure, 70 by palpation, pulse 160. He was running on the edge of what a heart can give. We pushed more saline, the last half bag dripping down. I thought of my ICU back home where pressors run like water. Here there was nothing, just gravity and prayer. The repair was crude, but it held. We irrigated with the cleanest saline we had, not nearly enough, but better than nothing. I closed layer by layer, each knot tied with the weight of knowing infection was already waiting. We covered the wound with the last piece of sterile gauze. Amal taped it down firmly, her fingers trembling now that the storm had passed. Silence filled the room. The generator caught again, the light steadied. Yusuf exhaled. He looked at me, his eyes saying what neither of us dared. The surgery had been necessary, but without antibiotics, without an ICU, survival was uncertain. We had given him a chance, nothing more. The boy stirred faintly as the ketamine wore off, his breath shallow but present. I took his hand. His skin burned with fever even through my gloves. I told him softly that the operation was over, that he was still here. His lips moved as if he wanted to answer, but no sound came. Amal adjusted the mask, brushed his hair from his forehead. Outside the windowless wall, we could still hear the distant thud of artillery. The building trembled and settled again. Inside, we were left with the sound of his labored breathing and the drip of the last saline drops. We had done all we could. The rest was in the hands of the night. He lay in the corner bed of the ward, bundled in 2 thin blankets that smelled of detergent and smoke. The fever had not broken. Amal had placed a cool cloth on his forehead, changing it every half hour. The saline line had already run dry. I checked his vitals again, blood pressure still low, his pulse racing, his skin hot and clammy. The wound dressing was intact, but the infection was already declaring itself. I knew what I feared. Without antibiotics and intensive care, he had little chance. I sat beside him through the night. His breathing rasped, each inhale shallow. Once his eyes opened. They were glassy, but he was aware. He studied my face the way people look at something they are trying to memorize. I told him he was strong, that he had made it through the operation. His lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, more like a sigh. A little later he spoke, voice no louder than the hiss of the oxygen. "Enough," he said. "You have already done too much for me. Do not waste more medicine or strength. I am grateful you did not leave me to die on the floor." I felt a twist in my chest. I told him he was young, that he could still fight. He closed his eyes and shook his head. Then he whispered that his mother had died when he was born, and his father had never been the kind of man who gave comfort. He said he had never once been held the way a child should be. He turned his face toward me. "If you do not mind, doctor, hold me once, so I will know how it feels before I go." For a moment I could not move. My throat closed with tears I had refused for weeks. My training had taught me to measure fluids, calculate doses, chart progress. It had not prepared me for this. He looked at me with fever-bright eyes, not pleading, simply asking. I set aside the stethoscope. I slid my arms around his thin shoulders and pulled him close. His body trembled with heat and chill together. His cheek pressed against my shoulder. He gave a small exhale, and for the first time since I met him, his face softened. He whispered that now he understood what love felt like, even if only for this moment. I held him tighter. The sounds of the ward faded. There was only his breathing against me, his heart racing under my hand. I wanted to freeze that second, to give him more than I could, but all I had was the warmth of my arms and the weight of my tears. The sky outside the shattered windows had begun to pale with dawn. I had not closed my eyes once through the night. The boy's breathing grew shallower, each rise and fall of his chest more fragile than the one before. Amal had sat with me until exhaustion claimed her, and she dozed against the wall, arms crossed, head bent forward. Yusuf had gone to check on other patients, his shoulders stooped under the weight of too many nights like this one. It was just the boy and me in that hour when the world is caught between night and day, when silence is at its deepest. His fever had not broken. The cloth on his forehead warmed within minutes of being placed, and I would change it, wring it out, lay it down again. I counted his pulse at his wrist. It fluttered, weak, fast, the rhythm of a heart running out of strength. I held on to his hand, not out of medical duty anymore, but because it seemed the only thing left I could do. He opened his eyes once more, and I leaned close. His voice was almost gone, yet I heard him. He whispered that he was not afraid now. He said that the warmth of my arms had been enough, that even if he left the world tonight, he had already received the gift he had wanted his whole life. He paused, his breath catching, and then he added words that will never leave me. "Doctor, you must go on saving others. Do not be afraid. Some of us only need a single embrace, a little warmth, to feel we have lived an entire life." Tears blurred my sight. I tried to answer, but no words seemed worthy. Instead, I squeezed his hand tighter, and he looked at me with calm eyes, as if already half beyond this world. His lips curved into a faint smile, then his breath hitched, slowed, and with one final exhale, it stopped. I listened, waiting for another rise of his chest, another whisper of air, but there was none. His pulse vanished under my fingers. The monitor line, weak and erratic, flattened. He had gone, yet the smile remained, soft on his face, as though he had finally met the mother he had never known. I bent over him, my forehead pressed against his still hand. The tears I had held back for weeks came now in a rush, hot and unstoppable. I did not weep with the quiet discipline of a physician. I wept like a human being who had witnessed a life end too soon. My shoulders shook, my throat closed. I let myself grieve, there in the half-light of morning, because anything else would have been dishonest. Amal stirred and woke. She saw me, saw him, and her own eyes filled. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. No words needed. Yusuf returned then, silent as he stood in the doorway. He did not ask for details. He had seen this scene countless times, but still he bowed his head. In that moment, none of us were doctors or nurses. We were simply people standing in the presence of loss. I straightened and adjusted the blankets around the boy. His skin was cooling already, his fingers stiffening slightly, yet the smile remained. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and whispered a thank you, though I knew he could not hear. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me be the witness to your last moments." The sun was rising outside, pale light spilling through the jagged glass and the torn plastic that tried to cover it. I stood and wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. Amal was already needed at another bedside, and Yusuf was called away by a cry down the hall. I was left again with my thoughts, my grief, and the heavy truth that the war would not pause for one young man's death. I stepped into the corridor. The building was alive again with sounds, children coughing, patients moaning, the distant crack of artillery. Life continued, relentless. I walked past the classroom where children still slept under the supervision of their teacher. One of them, the girl with the rubber band in her hair, opened her eyes and looked at me. For a moment I wondered if she sensed what had just happened. I nodded to her, and she lowered her gaze again. At the triage area, new casualties were arriving. Men carried another stretcher inside, a boy no older than the one I had just lost. His leg was mangled, wrapped in blood-soaked fabric. Amal was already there, calling for supplies, directing the orderlies. Yusuf bent to assess the injury. I felt the weight in my chest, heavy as stone, but I also felt the echo of the boy's last words. "Do not be afraid. Go on saving others." I tightened the straps of my gown, pulled on new gloves, and stepped forward. My heart was still raw, my eyes swollen, but I knew that grief could not be the end of me here. Grief had to become fuel. His final gift to me was not despair, but courage, the reminder that even when medicine fails, humanity does not. So I walked into the next battle, carrying his words in my chest. And in the rising light of Gaza, I told myself once more, do the next right thing, even when afraid. This story reminds me that medicine is not always about technology, machines, or perfect protocols. Sometimes, in places where we are powerless, a single act of humanity becomes the strongest medicine. That young man in Gaza did not survive because of what we lacked, but he left behind something stronger than despair, the courage to keep saving, to keep caring, even when afraid. If this story touched you, I invite you to stay with our channel, to listen, to share your own experiences of humanity and resilience. Every story matters, every voice matters. Together, we remember that compassion can outlast even the darkest nights.